We thought we were just cleaning out an old basement. Dust, boxes, forgotten memories. But then we found the first jar, then another, and another. By the time we were done, there were 2,000 jars of green beans stacked in the middle of the room. And that's when I realized my grandpa had been planning this for nearly 20 years. Before we dive into this story, if you love real, emotional, slightly chaotic family stories like this, make sure you hit subscribe, because trust me, this one gets personal. If you asked me to describe my childhood in one word, it would be full. Not rich, not perfect, not easy, just full. Full of people, full of noise, full of life. Because our family didn't just visit each other. We lived around each other. My grandparents had 5 children, 5 very different personalities, 5 different lives. But somehow, they all ended up settling within about 10 miles of one place. My grandparents' house. That house wasn't just a house. It was the center of everything. Birthdays? There. Holidays? There. Arguments? Definitely there. Makeups? Also there. And as the oldest grandchild out of 12, I saw it all. My dad raised cattle and pigs. Not as a hobby. Not for fun. This was work. I remember waking up early. Way earlier than any kid should. The air still cold, the ground damp. The smell of hay and dirt clinging to everything. There was always something to do. Feed the animals. Fix a fence. Check the water. And no matter how tired you were, you showed up. Because that's just how our family worked. If my dad represented hard work, my grandma represented survival. She had a garden. And when I say garden, I don't mean a few tomatoes and some herbs. I mean rows. Endless rows. Green beans. Corn. Tomatoes. Peppers. Carrots. It stretched so far that as a kid it felt like a maze. And every summer, that garden turned into something else entirely. Canning days weren't optional. They were events. The women in the family, my mom, my aunts, my grandma, would all gather at the house. The kitchen would transform. Counters covered in vegetables. Boiling water constantly steaming the windows. The sharp smell of vinegar mixing with the earthy scent of fresh produce. And the sound. God, the sound. Lids clinking. Jars tapping. Voices overlapping. Laughter. Sometimes argument, but mostly rhythm. Hand me another jar. Not that one, that one's chipped. Who cut these beans? They're uneven. I did. Well, don't do it like that again. And then everyone would laugh. As kids, we weren't just watching. We were part of it. Snapping green beans for hours. Washing vegetables. Running jars back and forth. And sometimes, sneaking bites when nobody was looking. Once everything was canned, there was a system. Grandma would line up the jars like soldiers on the counter. Green beans, tomatoes, meat, fruit, everything labeled, everything dated, everything counted. Then she'd divide them. Each family got their share. Carefully calculated, fair, equal, practical. But there was one category that always seemed excessive. Green beans. So many green beans. It didn't matter how many people were in the house. It didn't matter how much was already stored. Every year, there were more. And there was one person in the entire family who had a serious problem with that. My grandpa. My grandpa wasn't loud. He wasn't the type to argue. He didn't demand attention. He was the kind of man who just existed quietly, worked hard, spoke less, watched everything. But there was one thing about him, one tiny, specific, oddly intense detail that everyone knew. He hated green beans. Not disliked, not tolerated, hated. I remember one specific afternoon. The sun was setting, casting that golden light through the kitchen window. Grandma was packing jars into boxes. Green beans. Again. Grandpa stood there, watching, arms crossed, silent for a while. Then, finally, he sighed. "Why do we need this many?" he muttered. Grandma didn't even look up. "Because we use them. We don't use this many." "We do." "No, we don't." She stopped, slowly turned toward him, gave him that look. "Well, I do." And that was it. Conversation over. Grandpa just shook his head. Didn't argue further. Didn't push. Just accepted it. After every canning day, there was one final step. Grandma would point. "Take these downstairs." And my grandpa, every single time, would carry the jars down the creaky basement stairs, one box at a time. I used to follow him sometimes, mostly out of boredom, sometimes curiosity. The basement was different, cooler, darker, smelled like dust, old wood, and something slightly damp. There were shelves everywhere, some organized, some not. Grandpa would walk in quietly, set the boxes down, pause for a second, then start placing the jars. But looking back now, there was something about the way he did it. He didn't just stack them. He didn't just line them up neatly like Grandma would have wanted. Sometimes he'd pause, look around, shift something, move a jar not onto the main shelf, but slightly behind something else. At the time, it meant nothing, just Grandpa being Grandpa. Dinner at my grandparents' house was never small. Long table, too many chairs, too many voices, and there they were again. Green beans, always present, always unavoidable. Grandma would serve them proudly, fresh from the garden. Grandpa would look at them, like they personally offended him. Sometimes he'd poke at them. Sometimes he'd move them around his plate. Sometimes he just wouldn't eat them. And every now and then, he'd say it. "You made too many of these." Grandma, without missing a beat. "Eat them." "I don't want to." "Well, that's what we have." And just like that, the conversation would end. But something about it, even as a kid, felt like a pattern. Same argument, same outcome. Every time, years passing, time moved the way it always does. Quietly, relentlessly. We grew up. Some of us moved away. Some stayed close. But that house never changed. The garden stayed full. The kitchen stayed busy. The basement stayed packed. And every year, the green beans kept coming. More jars, more boxes, more trips down those stairs. And every year, Grandpa kept carrying them, without complaint, without protest, at least, on the surface. July 2000, the day my grandpa died, everything felt off. The house was full again, but not in the same way. No laughter, no noise, just quiet conversations, soft footstep, heavy air. I remember standing in the kitchen, looking at that same counter where jars used to line up. But this time, there was nothing there, just absence, Grandma kept going. Because that's what she did. The garden didn't stop. The canning didn't stop. The green beans definitely didn't stop. But something had shifted. And none of us realized yet that something had already been set in motion. 11 years later, Grandma passed away. And suddenly, that house, the center of everything, was no longer the same. It wasn't alive anymore. It was waiting to be cleaned, sorted, emptied. And that's when we all came back. The kids, the grandkids, the family, all of us, to go through everything. Closets, drawers, boxes, memories, and eventually, the basement. There were about 6 of us that day. We grabbed flashlights, moved carefully down those same creaky steps. The air hit us first. That same old smell. Dust. Time. Stillness. "All right," someone said. "Let's just start clearing stuff out." It felt normal. Routine. Almost mechanical. Boxes being lifted. Items being sorted. Some things kept. Some thrown away. Then, someone found the first jar. "Hey, there's still food down here." A jar of green beans. Cloudy. Old. But still sealed. "Wow, that's old," someone muttered. We laughed. Thought it was random. Then someone else found another. Then another. And another. At first, it didn't feel strange. Just forgotten storage. But then, we started finding them in places they shouldn't be. Behind boxes, under shelves, tucked into corners. "Why are there so many down here?" someone asked. No one answered. Because we were too busy. Finding more, and more, and more. The room started filling. Jars being carried out. Set in the center. Stacked. Lined up. At some point, we stopped talking. Because something didn't feel right anymore. This wasn't random. This wasn't forgotten. This was intentional. I stood there, looking at the growing pile. My heart doing that weird thing, where it starts connecting dots before your brain catches up. And then, I noticed the dates. Years. Decades. All green beans. All untouched. I felt something rise in my chest. A realization. A memory. A pattern. And suddenly, I couldn't stop myself. I started giggling. Everyone turned toward me. "What's so funny?" I looked at the jars, then back at them, still laughing. And I said, "Grandpa did this." They stared at me, confused. "Why would you think that?" I took a breath, about to explain, about to connect everything, about to reveal what had been hiding in plain sight for years. And that's when it hit me. Not just what he did, but how long he had been doing it. I thought it was just a joke, just a funny memory. Grandpa hiding a few jars so he didn't have to eat them. But the more I looked at those dates, the more I realized this wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was systematic. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Hit subscribe, because this story gets way deeper than it looks. I wiped my hands on my jeans without even realizing I was doing it. Dust clung to my palms, but I barely felt it. All I could see were those jars. The room had gone quiet. Not completely silent, but that kind of quiet where people are thinking instead of talking. My aunt crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "You really think your grandpa did all this?" Her voice wasn't dismissive. It was curious. I nodded slowly, not fully confident, but something inside me was pulling toward the idea. He hated green beans, I said, almost under my breath. Someone behind me laughed lightly. Yeah, we all know that. No, I said, shaking my head. You don't get it. I stepped closer to the pile, bent down, picked up one of the jars. The glass felt heavier than I expected. Cold, slightly gritty with age. I turned it around, looking at the label. 1987. I swallowed. He didn't just hide a few, I said. He's been hiding them for years. That's when the tone in the room shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't funny anymore. My cousin Mark stepped forward, grabbing another jar. Wait, hold on. He wiped the side with his sleeve. Squinted. Why are these all different? What do you mean? My aunt asked. He turned the jar toward us. This label, it's not Grandma's handwriting. That caught everyone's attention. Because Grandma's labels were consistent, neat, straight, almost identical. But this one was slightly crooked. The ink was darker. The handwriting a little messier. I picked up another jar. Then another. Some had Grandma's labels. Some didn't. A strange mix. And suddenly, a memory flickered in my head. Grandma always labeled jars in the kitchen, right after canning, at the counter, in front of everyone. So how would these even get different labels? Someone asked out loud. No one answered, because now, we were all thinking the same thing. Check behind the shelves, Mark said. I think there's more. We spread out. Started moving things more aggressively now. Boxes, old tools, broken furniture. And that's when it escalated, because behind one of the larger wooden shelves, we found something else. A crate. Not a box. Not loose jars. A crate. Carefully placed. Hidden just enough to not be seen unless you moved everything in front of it. Okay, that's weird, my aunt muttered. We pulled it out, set it on the ground. It creaked as we opened it. Dust puffed into the air. Inside, rows of green beans, perfectly lined up. Too perfectly. Like someone had taken time, care, effort. This isn't storage, I whispered. This is organized. My chest felt tight. Because now, this didn't feel like laziness or forgetfulness. This felt like a decision. I started walking slowly around the basement, looking at the shelves again. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Certain sections were too clean, too empty, like something had been removed from them, and then hidden somewhere else. Look at this, I called out. Everyone gathered. I pointed at a shelf. There should be jars here. How do you know? Someone asked. Because Grandma always filled every space. I tapped the wood lightly. There's dust outlines, faint circles, where jars had once been. But they weren't there anymore, because they had been moved. Deliberately, we started checking more jars, systematically now, calling out years. 1982, 1990, 1995, 1999. They weren't random. They were every year, every single year. From the early 80s until 2000, the year he died. I felt a chill run down my spine. He stopped, I whispered. What? My aunt asked. He stopped in 2000. Everyone froze, because we all knew what that meant. That's when Grandpa died. And suddenly, this wasn't just a weird habit. This was something he had been doing, consistently, for nearly 2 decades, without anyone noticing. Wait, my cousin said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling Mom. He stepped aside. We could still hear his voice. Hey, quick question. Did Grandma ever, complain about missing jars? Pause. No, like green beans specifically. Another pause. No? Not even once. He looked back at us, eyes slightly wider now. Okay, yeah, alright. I'll call you later. He hung up slowly. She said no, he said. No what? Someone asked. No missing jars. No issues. Nothing. That didn't make sense. It didn't make any sense. Because there were thousands of jars down here. That meant, every year, Grandma thought they were being eaten, distributed, used. But they weren't. At least not all of them. Okay, so where did she think they were going? My aunt asked. No one had an answer, because there were only 2 possibilities. Either she knew, or she didn't. And both options were unsettling. I walked back toward the stairs, trying to clear my head. Then I stopped, because something caught my eye. The floor. There was a faint path. Not obvious, but worn. Like someone had walked the same route, over and over again, from the stairs, to the far corner of the basement, where more jars were hidden. I followed it slowly, each step heavier than the last. This is where he walked, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. He did this repeatedly, trip after trip, year after year, carrying boxes down, then, taking some away, hiding them. We started estimating. Rough guesses at first. How many do you think are here? Couple hundred? More. We kept counting, grouping, stacking. The number climbed, and climbed. 500, 800, 1200. No one was talking anymore. By the time we got close to the final count, someone finally said it. This is close to 2,000. The words hung in the air. Heavy. 2,000 jars. That's not accidental. That's not forgetful. That's not lazy. That's intentional. And that's when something inside me changed. At first, this had felt like a joke, a funny story, a quirky grandpa thing. But now, it felt different, calculated, quiet, patient. I could picture him now, walking down those stairs, holding a box, pausing, listening, making sure no one was around. Then slowly, moving jars out of sight. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times, over years, without getting caught. I let out a breath, then I laughed again. But this time, it wasn't nervous. It was confident. He just didn't want to eat them, I said. Everyone looked at me. That's it, I continued. He found a way around it. He didn't argue, didn't fight. He just avoided it. There were nods, small ones, because that explanation was comforting, simple, easy. Yeah, that sounds like him, my aunt said. Quiet, stubborn. We all relaxed a little. The tension softened, because now we had an answer, or at least, we thought we did. All right, someone said. So what do we do with all these? That question changed everything, because now, we had to interact with it, touch it, move it, deal with it. And that's when things started getting strange. One of my cousins picked up a jar, turned it slightly, The guys. We looked over. There's something wrong with this one. He held it up. The lid was slightly lifted. Not fully open. Just off. That's not good, someone muttered. No, it's not, I said quietly. Because now, this wasn't just about hiding jars. This was about time, years, decades, and what happens when something is sealed, then left, forgotten. Another jar, different person, same issue. This one too, then another. Here, then another. Wait, this one smells weird. The room shifted again. That uneasy feeling came back stronger, because now, this wasn't just a harmless secret. This was something we didn't fully understand. Okay, stop opening them, my aunt said quickly. Just don't touch anything yet. But it was too late, because now, we were all looking at the jars differently. Not as food, not as memories, but as something else. Something that had been sitting for decades, hidden, ignored. Phones came out again. Hey, random question. Did Grandpa ever go down to the basement alone? Did he ever, move stuff around? Answers came back. Yeah, sometimes. Why? No reason. But there was a reason. We just didn't fully see it yet. I stepped back, looked at the room, the jars, the crates, the shelves, the path, the dates, and then I looked at the stairs, the same stairs he walked down, again, and again, and again, and suddenly, that confident explanation I had just given didn't feel right anymore, because if this was just about not eating green beans, why hide them so carefully? Why keep doing it for years? Why make sure no one ever noticed? Why this much effort? My chest tightened, because I realized something in that moment. Something small, but deeply unsettling. This wasn't avoidance. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't harmless. This was something else. Something quieter. Something smarter. Something planned. I stared at the jars. My voice barely a whisper. He didn't just hide them. I swallowed, my mind finally catching up to what my instincts had been trying to tell me. And that's when it hit me. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He didn't even try to win the argument. For nearly 20 years, he just quietly walked down those basement stairs and built something no one would notice, until it was too late. The words had barely left my mouth. He didn't react because he already had a plan. And suddenly, everything in that basement felt different. Not just strange, not just unsettling, but intentional. I stood there, staring at the jars, and for the first time, I stopped seeing them as objects and started seeing them as evidence. It didn't hit all at once. It came in pieces, fragments, moments from years ago, finally lining up. Grandma at the counter, labeling jars, counting everything, careful, precise. Grandpa standing behind her, quiet, watching, and then later, him carrying the boxes down. That part everyone saw. That part was normal, expected, routine. But what came after? That was his time, his space, his decision. I walked slowly toward one of the crates again, ran my fingers across the top layer of jars, each one representing a moment, a year, a silent choice. He didn't just hide them, I said softly. No one interrupted this time. He removed them from the system. My aunt frowned slightly. What do you mean? I took a breath, trying to explain something that was still forming in my own head. Grandma thought everything was being used, I said. She counted them. She distributed them. But he intercepted them. I pointed around the room. He took them out of circulation. The room went quiet again. Because now, this wasn't just about not eating green beans. This was about control. I walked over to the shelves, pointed at the dust outlines again. She thought these were being emptied because we ate them. But they weren't. They were being moved. Mark slowly nodded. So every year he just skims some off the top? Yes, I said. Not enough to be obvious. Not enough to raise suspicion. But enough over time. I gestured toward the massive pile in the center. To become this. 2,000 jars. Not dump. Not forgotten. Accumulated. And then it finally clicked. Fully. Clearly. Uncomfortably. This wasn't about avoiding green beans. This was a long-term, silent protest. Grandma made too many. Wouldn't listen. Wouldn't adjust. Wouldn't change. So Grandpa didn't fight her. He adapted. He let her believe everything was normal, while slowly, quietly, undoing it, year after year, without confrontation, without argument, without conflict. He let her win every conversation, and then changed the outcome anyway. Wait, my cousin said suddenly. If she thought they were being eaten, then what did she think we were eating? That question hit harder than anything so far, because now, this wasn't just between Grandma and Grandpa. This involved all of us. Phones came out again. Calls started flying. Hey, quick question. Do you remember getting a lot of green beans every year? Pause. Yeah. Like a lot. Yeah, why? Did you ever feel like it was less than expected? No. Confusion. More calls. More questions. And the answers didn't line up. Some families said they got plenty. Some said they didn't. Some said they stopped getting as many over time. But no one noticed anything clearly. Because it was subtle. Gradual. Exactly how he planned it. Voices started overlapping. This doesn't make sense. He couldn't have taken that many without someone noticing. But he did. How? I leaned against the wall, heart racing now, because the more we talked about it, the more impossible it seemed. And yet, the evidence was right in front of us. My aunt sat down on an old chair nearby, just dropped into it. I cooked those, she said quietly. We all looked at her. I stood in that kitchen with her, she continued. Every summer. Her voice started to shake. We worked so hard. And suddenly, this wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't clever. This was personal. I thought we were helping the family, she said. Her hands were trembling slightly. We were feeding everyone. And he was just hiding it? The room felt heavier. Because now, it wasn't just about Grandpa's frustration. It was about Grandma's effort, her pride, her identity, and the fact that he never told her. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was impressed. The patience, the consistency, the sheer discipline of it. But another part felt uncomfortable, because this wasn't just a harmless trick. This was years of quiet deception between two people who loved each other, or at least, who lived their lives side by side. Time passed. I don't know how long. Eventually, the noise died down. Phones went silent. People stopped talking. Because there were no more answers to find. Just the reality in front of us. 2,000 jars. A lifetime of small, silent choices. And a man who refused to fight, but also refused to give in. I walked back toward the center. Looked at the pile one more time. And something strange happened. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I understood him. In a way I hadn't before. He didn't want conflict. Didn't want arguments. Didn't want to hurt anyone. But he also didn't want to live his life forced into something he hated. So he found a third option. Not confrontation. Not surrender. But strategy. Quiet. Patient. Invisible. And unbelievably effective. Eventually, we had to deal with it. We couldn't leave the jars there. So we sorted them. Checked what was still sealed. What wasn't. Most of them were too old to trust. But some, surprisingly, were still intact. And that led to the strangest part of all. They didn't go to waste. They were redistributed. Back into the family. Almost like the system had corrected itself. Delayed. But completed. By the end of the day, the basement was quieter. Not empty, but lighter. The pile was gone, but the feeling remained. That sense of something hidden, finally revealed. Years later, I still think about that day. Not just because of what we found, but because of what it meant. We always think conflict looks loud. Arguments, fights, shouting. But sometimes, the most powerful resistance is silent. It's not about winning in the moment. It's about changing the outcome without anyone realizing it. My grandpa never raised his voice, never forced his opinion, never demanded control. But in the end, he still got his way. Not through strength, but through patience. And that's something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the quietest people are the ones with the longest plans. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Because the stories that seem simple at first are usually the ones hiding the most.